Good evening, friends. Welcome to the Leader's Edge, Episode 1, Season 5. Tonight, we have an amazing guest speaker, Mr. Edward Musiak. But before I do the introduction, may I remind you to click on the like and subscribe buttons. So let me proceed. Edward is a passionate advocate of e-learning. And by the way, he's a Philippines permanent resident. And he is proud to be a supporter of Filipino tech startups. From being a salesperson, he became a sales manager and then grew up in his career ladder as a global sales leader with a comprehensive experience cut across 15 countries throughout the Middle East and Asia Pacific. Because he was passionate about selling, he learned to turn his mistakes into great opportunities. Let me share with you his top three strengths. Of course, that's sales knowledge and experience, grit and honesty. He got better and better at what he does. And then his career highlights would speak of Edward sharing 40 years of experience in global sales, sales management, business development, country, and new territory expansion. He has a deep understanding of the HR software market, which is very interesting, hands-on experience in HR operations, including time and attendance and payroll. And on top of all those, he has a strong personal and academic knowledge of mental illness in the workplace and how to deal with it. And yes, my dear friends, that is our topic for tonight. And therefore, let us all welcome Mr. Edward Musiak. Edward, good evening.
Good evening, Grace. How are you?
How are you?
Doing good, doing good.
So, how would you like to start sharing with us, the topic that you have chosen for our viewers?
I think there's two aspects to it. And the first one is that as a personal one. So this is something that's been part of my life since I was a teenager. So, depression and anxiety are a daily thing for me. And so you learn, you experience. But the other thing is when we moved here to the Philippines 3 years ago, and I already knew this from my wife, who is from the Philippines, there is a kind of a stigma associated here with both, with mental illness, with depression, with anxiety, and it's something I want to, for lack of a better word, destigmatize and have people appreciate that, you take care of your physical health. Why not your mental health?
Correct. And you mentioned something about the stigma. And of course, I'm familiar with it. A lot of us Filipinos are familiar with it. What have you heard?
My best story, and I know that as soon as I walk out of here, my wife is going to hit me with a baseball bat. But when we got together 20 years ago, and I remember at one point, and I don't remember exactly where we were, but we were talking about this subject, and she said, "No, you'll see that in the Philippines we don't suffer from depression." And I've never forgotten that. And my wife is actually a dentist, so she's incredibly well educated, and she wasn't joking. I mean, it's a real. And I realized that her thinking was not dissimilar to all of the other Filipinos I then got to meet for the 20 years we were in the Middle East, and then we met when I came here either. So yes, it doesn't exist.
And having lived in the Philippines for so many years now, how would you connect that with our culture, with the Filipino culture, that we don't get depressed, or there's no such thing as depression? What have you observed?
I think it's still very much an under the carpet issue. It's people, it's very difficult, my experience, for Filipinos to admit to having an issue that's up here rather than here in their body. And I think that's just a question of time. I think this topic needs to be spoken about. It needs to be discussed, and it'll be similar to, when I was, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we didn't have the emphasis on exercise, on physical well-being, on good eating that we've got now. And so I think this will follow that same trend. It just takes time, but it means that we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep bringing it up.
Totally agree. Totally agree, Edward. If I may share, my first job out of the university, I was a guidance counselor of De La Salle, of one of the universities that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yep.
And I stepped back. We had a lot of students, yes, but if you look at the population of the students who would go for one-on-one counseling, it was just really, really very few. And that's the reason why, as an institution, we had to create programs, right? To reach out to the students and say, hey, we are here. We are here to listen to you. And we're just here for you, And so we created the peer counseling program and many other programs, sensitivity sessions. We used to call them T groups many, many years back. But, let's take it years forward now and bring this into the workplace, right? Because we have thousands of employees in the company. And I'm sure you've worked with companies with so many employees, and you've seen this many times over: depression, anxiety, burnout. Then they quit, or absences would be high. The rates of absences would be high. Turnover would be high. So how do you relate now that kind of let's call it transformation of the mindset of our employee workforce when it comes to wellness, that their organizations, wellness programs, that their organizations would provide for them?
I think step one is exactly what you're doing right now. I think that the country needs more people like you who dedicate time and effort to talk about this subject and to talk to people who are trained in dealing with it, trained in helping, and to people who have gone through it. So that's step number one. And I'm not saying that to praise you, but that's what we need. You need people to talk, to get that open. And I think that needs to be directed at all sorts of levels. If we take a corporation, for instance, there needs to be an education of management that mental illness is a real thing. It's not a made up thing, and that you need to have a look at why there are people who are not performing, why they are having so many days off. And, there's a huge link also between mental illness and physical illness. So we need to start training our leaders that, mental illness is a real thing and it affects physical illness. So what really is the issue? And to start bringing up the topic of how should they go about, what are the various alternatives that are available within organizations that perhaps anonymously allow employees to talk about what's on their mind. Because I think right now, to expect employees to openly discuss their fears, their concerns, and their feelings, I don't think the Philippines is quite ready for that yet. It's not going to happen, and we need that. We need a softly approach.
And I have actually seen some organizations, and this is in the BPO industry, Edward, that because of the client that they have and that they're supporting, the client requires the company to put together an employee assistance program, and they require their employees to go for one-on-one counseling at least 1 hour, let's say 1 hour fortnightly or 1 hour per quarter, but it is required by the client. So it forces them, the employees, to avail of this if they want to stay in that account, right? So what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I mean, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and it's only in the last, I guess, 3 months, 4 months, I'm starting to see more and more discussions and articles about psychological safety. That was never discussed before. And I've been using LinkedIn since 2011. And in these last 3 or 4 months, and I think that's a response to COVID, that this topic now, without saying the West is better than the East, psychological safety and attention to psychological issues in the West, certainly where I come from in Australia, is a major thing. I mean, it's something that HR practitioners are acutely aware of. And I think that, programs such as the one where having the customers of BPOs forcing these kind of evaluations should become the norm. And, so I worked with and have been associated with organizations here where what they've done is actually they've taken it, and it costs money. They've hired a third-party psychological company, and it gives employees the opportunity to go to them and talk. And now none of that information is shared back with the company, not the specifics, but the general. And that's a great step forward, to give, because step number one is people have to talk. People have to say what's on their mind, what's bothering them, what's happening. And so I think that's something that we need to be encouraging a lot, is for companies to make that investment.
You mentioned about HR, and yes, the role of HR given such programs is very key. It's it's pivotal to
Absolutely.
everything that would happen, right? But I am an HR practitioner by DNA, by the way. And I always believe that there's a strong partnership that happens with the people managers. And that's where I think HR would have to train, let's say, the team leaders or the people managers to spot employees who would need some help or who would just need to talk. And it starts with the coaching and mentoring sessions that these employees would have with their line managers, right? So the training that has to go from HR to the people managers or to the line managers has to be really, really strong. Are there any recommendations that you have, Edward, based on what you have seen or what you have experienced in the 40 years that you have done, your sales and all of the, the roles that you have assumed in the past 40 years?
Well, first of all, can I just say that you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, you're 100% correct. And I think that HR bears this awesome responsibility. I mean, I think HR now is not the, employee induction and hiring and surveys and sitting down with them explaining why an employee's been let go. That's old and hackneyed and clerical. I think a huge role now of HR is the wellness of those employees. I mean, the amount of money that is invested in an individual employee, and the time taken to get them to be productive is all for naught if someone doesn't focus on the mental and the physical wellness of those employees. And whether it's good or bad, the people who are most qualified to do that are HR. But it's not just the line managers. I think this is where, HR sadly, and I don't know why, have always taken a kind of a backseat role. HR's role, I think, is really sitting on the board, sitting at the board. If HR in a company is not sitting on the board, you're not going to achieve anything, right? So you may as well give up right then and there. HR has to be sitting at board meetings. And that then gives them the permission to engage C-level people, not just line managers. The line managers won't do it unless the C-level people sponsor it. That they encourage this kind of embracing of programs and teachings and engagements with the bosses where they can start to see whether it's verbal, body, what's written, actions, sick days, where they can start to notice. And that takes time and it takes an investment. But whether you like it or not, you now as HR have a massive responsibility to not just teach the line managers, but teach the guys at the top. Because they may be great at running a company, but they, I would hazard a guess, know nothing about mental illness or mental well-being. That's not their fault. But that responsibility does fall to HR. You're the best suited to do that. And it's a big task. It's a huge task. And I've seen a few that I've actually stepped up. Sadly, not many. And I think it needs these people like yourself and these types of programs to get HR to step up to the plate and say, okay, we have to learn first, and then we have to disseminate, because this is a major issue.
Thanks for the affirmation on behalf of all the HR professionals that are watching us right now. And I totally agree, Edward, I'm sorry. I totally agree that we should have a seat on the table.
Absolutely.
And I've shared it already in one episode here on Leader's Edge that I said, HR is no longer the paper shuffler. We're no longer just the pencil pushers. But we should have that seat on the board. And I like what you said about wellness, and you mentioned mental and physical. And so if we look at the holistic approach of wellness of our employees, what do you say about including two other aspects? From mental, physical, we have the financial wellness and the spiritual wellness to make it a holistic approach. Can you share your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I think I think that I'm trying to make sure I get the words correct. I think that you're right, and I'll get beaten up by HR people, but I think there are traditionally have been too many paper pushers, too many process-driven people in HR, and I've always, one of the things I've always been a believer is your balance, your balance book, your finances are not what characterize your company. Your profits are not what characterize your company. What characterizes your company are your employees, not the balance sheet. And it's those employees that are either going to get you to where you need to go or stop you from getting there. And the more well-rounded, the more physically healthy they are, the more mentally healthy they are. I'm not the world's greatest churchgoer. My wife has an issue with that. But there's, for instance, some tremendous statistics, whether you are a believer or not a believer, about the relationship between prayer and mental wellness and physical wellness. So yes, I think that I totally agree. I think that HR has to redefine its role, but they can only do that when they're at board level and not going and seeking permission. Please, can I do this? That's never going to happen. And at board level saying, this is how our approach now to, because the total well-being of an employee And then when you sum up the total number of employees, is this what's going to determine whether a company achieves or overachieves its target or misses them?
I like what you said about what, your wife and your being prayerfulness and being spiritual, because I think there's a different notion of organizations when it comes to rolling out spiritual programs. It doesn't have to be religion centric. It doesn't have to be supportive of any denomination, but rather having a clear understanding of what spirituality in the workplace is. It is quieting down. It is providing some space for our employees to just go in and just have some quiet time and maybe meditate or read, or just to, in the midst of the anxiety in the workplace, it's providing them that space.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, and I'm always amazed, at how when you go into an organization, and especially here in the Philippines, there's a nurse's room and a kind of a sick room, for lack of a better word. So if you're not feeling well, you can go and lay down in this room, and you may or may not be attended to by a nurse. But if you're losing the plot and you're overexhausted and you're tired and you really feel like you can't cope, there's no place of safety where you can go and sit down and just kind of calm down. So we're saying it's okay, we will build this room, which costs money, it takes up space, and we'll hire a nurse full time because you're not physically feeling well. But if you just feel like you're not coping, there's nowhere for you to go.
Right.
One's not more prioritized than the other. They're both the same. And in fact, sometimes your physical well-being may be a result of your mental well-being, burnout, exhaustion, not coping, a lousy boss, whatever. And there's this dichotomy that needs to be fixed.
And same with financial wellness.
Totally.
Right. And unfortunately, I think we're still teaching our employees or our people in general to really know how to save. There's the 80-20 rule, there's the 70-20-10, 70-30 rule, that you should at least save 30%, 20% of your income. And a lot of organizations have actually rolled out financial wellness as well.
Yeah.
And because if they have all these financial problems, it will now relate to how they would be acting in the office with their problems, with their burdens financially, debts left and right. And then they become anxious. And it just goes on and on and on, Edward. So,
yeah, I agree.
Right? So, with the many years that you have been here, is there anything specific that you have witnessed when it comes to how we should or how we do manage our finances, leading now into financial wellness?
The answer is not at a corporate level. I haven't experienced any. I think that, again, I think that's something that HR needs to drive, and I don't think it's a one-off message or a two-time-a-year message. It's something that needs to be, that line managers need to be bringing up with their employees on a monthly basis, and bringing in third parties that can teach them. There are lots of good third parties. There are lots of really excellent courses around that HR can drive towards, can drive the line managers towards, which they can start imparting towards the employees. I mean, unfortunately, in the Philippines, it's I earn it, I spend it, a kind of mentality, and I've never seen anything like it in anywhere else I've been. And it's something that needs to be fixed. It's it's in and out within 24, 48 hours. and then you're stressed, right? And then that brings on all of those other issues. So, that's where I think HR needs to move away from the we're not a paper. That's that clerical job. Let's find programs, let's find courses, let's send our line managers. But that means at a C level, convincing people that this is worth the investment, and that a 40% attrition rate is just not acceptable. I mean,
Uh-huh.
if you're getting,
Mhm.
I see people say, well, it's 40%, and they like you talk about, it's raining outside. Well, if it's 40% attrition, I mean, I would stop and think, why in heaven's name? That's disgusting. There's something significantly wrong. I mean, it takes what, 3 months to get a person. It takes you 2 months or 3 months to find a person,
Mhm.
and another 3 months to get them on speed. So you've lost 6 months essentially from an employee leaving. At 40%, I mean, do the math, it's not very good. And so that focus on employees, and it all comes down to a commitment from the top, HR stepping up and saying, we're going to teach our managers to guide our employees. And there are all sorts of programs around with a little bit of homework that can be employed that are not going to cost a fortune, but
Mhm.
compared to the losses of employees is a stone. It's nothing. It doesn't matter. It's a pebble. So I agree. I think it's but it depends. Different programs for different companies, but super important.
Let's take a different shift on, but still on mental wellness. What are your thoughts around the mental wellness of the so-called millennials? Because personally, I had my own observation with this generation compared to us baby boomers or the X gen or the Y gen. Um, what are your thoughts around the level of mental wellness or awareness of our generation now?
I mean, this is just the personal opinion. So you're probably going to get a lot of people calling in and objecting to what I say. I think that the millennials and the younger ones now are a bit more aware. They're more aware than you and I were, right? Certainly me, right? I didn't know what I was going through. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why I was having chest pains, sweating, feeling like I was going to die, not being able to breathe. I thought I was having a heart attack. I didn't know, for instance, why I didn't want to get out of bed, right? And I think that the younger ones are learning more. But I think there's a kind of it's still a bit flippant, the attitude towards it. I'm not sure that the people I know in that bracket quite understand the seriousness of this. So, I'm feeling down. That's normal. But if you're feeling down for 5 days straight, that's not normal.
Then, yeah.
And that means that you need to do something. So I think they're aware that something's not quite right, right? And I know I'm generalizing and that there are exceptions, but I don't think, certainly in the Philippines, we're quite yet at the stage where, wow, I need to do something. Now, having said that, there are all sorts of obstacles that they need to overcome, right? And that is, you need to find someone to talk to, right? That person's probably not cheap, right? Um, you may or may not need medication. You may or may not need therapy. And I think these are all kind of issues that need to be addressed. The money one, the help really, I mean, not at a countrywide level, but at an employee level has to come, I believe, can be alleviated by the company. Companies that are prepared to invest and say, we'll provide you with an avenue where you can talk to someone, where you don't have to worry about the fact that it's going to cost you 2,000 pesos for 45 minutes,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, So I think that can be addressed that particular way. But I think there needs to be more of an awareness made, a more discussion about well-being and mental well-being, about symptoms and what they could be, and recognizing when to take action, when not to take action, and that taking away that stigma. And I think it still does exist. Even amongst the younger ones, psychotherapy. In the United States, it's almost a badge of honor. I'm doing psychotherapy. Here, it's the complete opposite, right? So I think we're making progress, but it's not happening fast. But having said that, it didn't happen fast for us in the West either. It's evolutionary rather than revolutionary. So I think we need to continue talking so that people become more and more aware. So yeah, we're making progress, but a lot more needs to happen.
Correct. That's right. And as you've said, it doesn't happen overnight. It's a year on year of transformation, the transition, the change in mindset, change in perspective, educating the people, training them. What would be the trigger points? Like what would be, things that are you may call them the symptoms, but making them aware that when you feel this and that, then it should raise the flag, right? And go ahead.
And I think, when you've got, certainly with depression and anxiety, one of the things I've learned after, a lifetime of this is you need to talk to someone. I mean, and that's a must. You have to talk to someone. And here in the Philippines, you're not going to talk to your parents because they don't understand, right?
I was just going to go to that.
Yeah,
talking to parents.
Yeah, it's not their fault. And, a lot of the parents, so I'll give you an example. After 40 plus years of psychotherapy, etc., it became pretty clear that for me, a lot of my issues are genetic. So my mother suffered from depression and anxiety, but in her days, it was called nerves. What does that mean? She was a nervous person. Actually, she wasn't a nervous person. She actually had some really serious issues that required significant attention. But she didn't have anyone to talk to. When I was born, we didn't have anyone to talk to. So I think there needs to be this environment created where there's some trust. And, again, you're not going to talk to your friends. Your friends will say, "Oh, go have a few drinks," or get over. The worst one that drives me crazy: get over it, right? Just get over it, right? Take a deep breath. So I think whether companies here like it or not, the responsibility comes back to them. There needs somewhere within the company to be a place where there's a trusting discussion can take place. And a good way to start is having a third party that's associated with that company. And even though you, as head of HR, may be someone that I really do trust, but I may not recognize that for a few years. But in that interim, having a third party that they can go to and talk to, and at least start to recognize what's really going on, and you could go to your doctor, but your doctor's trained in, my experience was your doctor's trained in the physical. They don't know either, right? It may be mental, right. But how do they know? They don't know.
Mm-hmm. And for the here and now, Edward, like with this COVID, with the pandemic, and we're running 2 years, well, a year and a half, I have observed that there's so much programs now, podcasts, webinars on mental health and wellness, being able to cope with, this entire situation. And so what advice or what suggestion would you give for us, for organizations, for individuals, to cope with our current situation? Because truly it affects our mental well-being.
There's no question. I think that COVID. I think that we're in a situation now where we're going to see the effects of this, other than the physical ones. We're going to see the effects of this in years to come. I think people have been put through a mental ringer. They've been squeezed mentally in a way where the outcomes of this are not yet known. And this happens at various levels. So to answer your question, the ones who are working, HR, their colleagues, there should be an encouragement to go out and learn. You cannot be made to work and live in the same spot, and your hours have gone up. I mean, from what I know, people are not working 8 hours a day now. They're working much longer hours. There's a fear of when they go out. I think that there is a price to pay. They will pay a price. Their stress levels will go up, whatever. So people need an encouragement from companies to go out and learn. An encouragement from companies to teach or make people aware. But I think that there also needs to be a governmental kind of, or a barangay approach towards those people who are poor and don't get access to our corporate environment, right? Where do they go? How do they recognize what's really going on? And there's a whole group of people there, millions of them, that we need to come up, and no one's talking about it. And it's irritating that we're not paying attention to that, because we're going to see issues there. But the one that I think we neglect at our peril are the kids, right? And I have a 13-year-old, and I see what's going on there, and I know what's going on with her friends. I don't see discussions taking place about the effect of being locked up at home. So at the moment, under 18, you cannot go out.
Right.
Above 65, which is where I fit, you cannot go out. Now, I'm a little bit older, a lot more water's passed on the bridge, hopefully a little bit wiser. We can cope a little bit better. But I do not believe that these kids who have been asked to stop sport, stop socializing, stop playing, can't go to a shopping center, can't meet their friends, and are confined to a little space, and that's their entire environment. Play, study, engage with parents, that there won't be an effect. And I think that that's another area that I worry, that I want to see more engagement from government, more help to parents, given that, start talking to your kids, teaching parents what to ask, what to look for, what are the symptoms. I had been through hell for 45 years. So it took me I was fairly quick at picking up the changes in my daughter, and they were significant. And, if she has to do another year, I worry about it. It's, she's the daughter I had a year ago is different to the daughter today. Right? She's more on edge. She's more on edge. She's more forgetful. She's different.
You just made me think of when you said that the government should do something about, those, let's say, in the provinces or in far-flung areas. In fact, yesterday, a question that I had was, because all of us are just so concerned now, who's vaccinated and who's not? Are you done with your first, or are you done with your second? But it's all coming from the city and probably the other LGUs. But what about those in far-flung areas of the country, not only on vaccine, but to your point, having, some talks or just being with them to find out how they are coping,
Yeah, I think that.
right? So you just made me think, Edward. And so, with that, there's just so many things yet that we can uncover on mental health, not only in the workplace, but even with us as a family, with us as individuals. And in between our talk, I picked it up that you yourself had your own journey on this, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're about to wrap up, and when we wrap up, we would like to hear from you on what would be your message for all our friends and our viewers out there.
I think the message is that if things seem a little bit off, right? So I'll give you an example. If you're feeling down a little bit more often than you would normally feel down, if you're feeling tired more, if the body aches, the stomach aches, the back aches, the headaches are more than they should be, if you're more irritable than you normally are, perhaps there are things going on now. You don't have to be aware of them, but do a little bit of research. All right. So to answer your question really, really quickly. So what do I do? The first thing is you got to exercise. Now, even within the confines of your house, the beauty of the internet is you can do your 10,000 steps watching a YouTube video. All right. So you've got to exercise. It's for me, where depression and anxiety sit one on this shoulder, one on this shoulder, right? Without it, I'd be dead. The second one is don't turn to alcohol as a way of fixing your problem. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Get out in the sun. It's amazing what sunshine and vitamin D do to help in anxiety and especially with depression. You can step out on your balcony, soak up the sun for 5 or 10 minutes, and people will go, that's voodoo. No, it's not. And do some research. Just stand out in the sun, soak it up. You will feel a million times better, right? And then the other thing is simple little things like breathing. When the heart starts beating faster, when you're feeling anxious, sit down, and people call it mindfulness and all sorts of things, and just slow your breathing down. Just do it for 2 or 3 minutes. Breathe in at a particular beat, breathe out at the same beat. Breathe in and it's amazing. Put your fingers by, and feel your heartbeat. After breath number 2, 3, or 4, your heartbeat will start slowing down. So these are just simple little things which for me are daily. These are daily exercises. Sunshine, some greenery, blue. Have a look outside at the trees. Step out and have a look at a little bit of nature. Do your exercises and spend 3 minutes in the morning and 3 minutes at night just breathing in regularly, breathing out regularly. It's amazing how much that helps. It won't solve the problem, but it'll make you feel significantly better. So I guess,
Better.
yes, it will a lot. So they're kind of the things that I make a daily habit.
All right. So I'll start doing that, Edward, and thank you for that. I'm doing bits and pieces of what you've said, but it's really the intentionality of exercising, going out in the sun, and release those happy hormones, so to speak. And so, talking about happy hormones, thank you so much, Edward, for being with us. It's such a pleasure to have you here on Leader's Edge. And we hope to see you again. And so, friends, for our next episode, that's episode 2 for season 5, we will have Tinette Cortez, who will again talk on mental wellness, now with a very different approach. And so before I go, remember, learning is a never-ending journey with limitless vistas. Good evening, everyone.